This is an account by our great Elohim of peace on the 7 steps to creation. An excerpt from The 7 Mighty Elohim Speak on the 7 Steps to Precipitation by Thomas Prince, a Bridge to Freedom publication. Some of you already know that the evolution of the Elohim is through the elemental kingdom, elemental meaning mind of God. Each of us started out as small elemental beings, belonging to some different system, different galaxies at different times. I was one among those elementals who followed the exact order of creation. You have seen universal elemental light filling the atmosphere. Those tiny electrons seem to be going nowhere, just flitting hither and yon in the sunshine. You see, when one is first God created, there is complete freedom to just enjoy oneself. That is where some folks get the idea of heaven as being a place of eternal enjoyment, rest, and a place where you do as you please. They remember backward, for this is not looking forward. And I warn you ahead of time, the future is not going to be like that. Those were your pre-Eden days. Long, long ago, I was one of these tiny elementals, flitting hither and yon in my universe. Whenever I felt like it, attaching myself to some light ray projected by some being of whom I was scarcely cognizant. At times I rode upon a great beam of light, which was destined to become part of a star or some other lovely God creation. I had no responsibilities and no obligations. This same freedom is given to all of God's creations. For instance, your ion presence, when first created, was permitted to go through each of the 7 spheres of activity around the sun, find that sphere in which it was most interested, stay in any temple as long as it liked, at the feet of any master for any length of time it desired. The angels have like freedom. When first created, they transport themselves in glory and light, and eventually become part of the virtues of faith, hope, charity, or any God virtue they please. These angels live in the temples of their choice. They absorb and just are. Then suddenly one day there came a feeling within me that I wanted to be a conscious part of creation. When this takes place within anyone, it means that the activity of the first ray is born within them, the will to do. So it was with me. Then I sought out someone whom I knew could tell me just what to do. And when I had found such a one, I was told that if I dared to go to a certain nature temple, I could learn how to build form, perhaps a flower. To do this, together with others of like intent, I had to learn to hold the thought form shown to us on the altar by the presiding diva, our instructor. After enrolling myself as a student in this nature temple, my first assignment was to build a 5-petaled yellow flower, and I shall never forget it. Oh, there must have been a couple of 100 of us in the class, all quite as irresponsible as myself. We could hear beautiful music outside the temple. The air was so lovely and fresh. Beautiful beings of light were passing through the atmosphere outside the windows, and the holding of the pattern of that flower got so monotonous. I can tell you. However, the diva just stood there on the altar, and, from himself, he externalized the pattern of this flower, which we were to learn to create. He tried to catch our thoughts and focus them upon that flower. But I soon found that just the will to do was not enough. They must follow the other 6 steps of creation to perfect the activity. Then suddenly perception came into my mind, and I thought, yes, this is a part of creation, and I perceived, at least, what the diva wanted me to try and do. Up until that time, I just enjoyed the fragrance, the color, the symmetry of form of that flower. I did not feel that I wanted to do anything more. As that feeling of perception took possession of me, I consciously tried. Oh, but that first form that I attempted to create was certainly a distorted one. It was sort of square. It did not have enough petals, nor did it have the right fragrance. Besides, just as soon as I took my attention away from it, the form was gone. Now, some in the class were still not very concentrated on their attention, and they were still flitting around. However, those of us who really meant business finally moved up to the front of the room, nearer the altar. Well, as we continued to absorb the instruction and tried again and again, finally one day the little yellow flower appeared in my hands, and I had the right fragrance for my flower. But, my goodness, just as I was about to present it to the diva, one of the archangels went by the window, and my attention being drawn by his great magnificent light, it left the flower for an instant. When I looked back at my hand, the flower was gone. Just a lack of concentration, you see. Now these divas do not speak at all. They give their instruction through radiation. Our teacher diva suggested to us that, if we wanted to create these flowers consciously, we could add beauty and perfection to a season of spring on some lovely planet, which the Elohim in charge of that planet were to beautify for the blessing of an evolution of living souls. As I thought about this, love for my endeavor was born within me. I felt I wanted to make that little flower perfect enough, fragrant enough, beautiful enough, and make it last long enough to really bless some part of life. That was the third aspect of divinity, love, you see. Then I forgot myself and the distraction of those who were going by outside. Then I really wanted to create that flower, and I stayed with it. What happened then? I received an assignment. The divas do not assign one to the task of even becoming an apple blossom until they know you will stay with the task long enough to complete it. In my assignment, I think there were about 700 of us directed to adorn one big tree. Incidentally, the yellow flower I was to create does not grow on your earth, nor does such a tree. Perhaps one day it shall. Here came another lesson which I did not learn at once. Our teacher reminded us that when we went to that planet with the great diva, we would see all different kinds of trees. He warned us to watch and see that our individual flower to be created did not become just like that which we saw on some other shrub or tree. I forgot his admonition, and mine did. I saw pink flowers, blue ones, white ones, and by the time I was through looking at them all, I had nothing definite of my own in mind, and therefore no manifestation. Then I learned the fourth lesson, the purity of holding to the divine pattern, which had been given to me in the beginning. When we finally went back to our nature temple, or schoolroom, none of us who had lost out was at all proud of his accomplishments. You see, those in charge always prepare many more elementals than they know will be needed for a certain creation. And, therefore, the creation was completed by those who could do the work. I did not volunteer so quickly for the next experience, I can tell you. However, within myself I determined that I would hold the pattern of that yellow flower until I had brought it forth into perfection. Finally, I did not even have to volunteer. My teacher, Diva, in mercy, said to me one day, "All right, you may go and try again." This time I closed my eyes, my mind, my attention to everything but becoming that yellow flower. Yet there remained even more for me to remember, constancy, for I allowed my petals to fall before spring was over. I had to learn the fifth activity of constancy and concentration until the Diva called me home. Because of my lack of constancy and after the premature falling of my petals, I was home a whole month before the others. I must tell you that I did not go into the temple for quite a while. I walked up and down outside, but I did not go in. At last I had to go in. You know that. Wherever you are and whatever you volunteer to do, you must finish some day. It is the same thing with humanity. They may play around as long as they wish, waste their time, but one day they must finish their course, fulfill their divine plan. Sooner or later, perhaps with your feathers trailing, you will go back to the fulfilling of your original divine plan. When we gathered again before the Diva in the nature temple, I was seated far back in the last row. I was small of stature, and I thought I would not be too easily seen there. Thinking to myself, I said, I shall not go out again, I shall just stay right here. However, next time we were taught the lesson of rhythm. Here I learned that I had to hold the purity of form, and that I had to stay at my post until I was released by the being who had sent me forth. That was Constancy. Then, amazingly, I learned that I had to go every spring. My goodness, I thought going once was a major achievement, but I learned the lesson of rhythm. Yellow flower, yellow flower, yellow flower, over and over and over again, each and every spring. I shall not attempt to tell you how many springtimes I became a yellow flower. Doing it once was a novelty, even a dozen times was fun, but every spring seemed to me like a long, steady, relentless grind. Obedience, obedience, obedience to the end. The last step I had to learn in this process of creation was to hold the peace. The last time that Diva told me that I was going to be a yellow flower again, I nearly lost the whole course. You see, in the meantime, others of my friends had become beautiful trees, shrubs, and other lovely creations, but I was still a little tiny yellow flower. So you see, I had to learn to hold the peace which I became myself, mind you, in a far distant future scheme. So if you are one of those little yellow flowers, learn to hold your peace. Perhaps one day you will be a sun to a system. Who knows what anyone's use of free will may do? At last, on this final trip, I just let go. I really did. I thought, if God wills it, I shall be this blossom for eternity. That was my last trip. That absolute surrender gave me my release, and that time when I returned to my Diva in the nature temples, he crowned my service of the ages. Ages, I said, with victory. Then I was graduated into the Divic kingdom. For a long time I served and worked with increasing efficiency until I finally took the initiation of the Elohim. Later, when given opportunity by the call from beloved Helios and Vesta for those who would volunteer to build for them this dear planet Earth, I voluntarily joined the other 6 Elohim to render that service. We served together in association, both for the joy of comradeship and the joy of creation.